Welcome to our final session of the afternoon. We are running this session in conjunction with the Karolinska Institutet.
Welcome to the Papers Podcast. This week I have with me the usual suspects, Lara.
Hi, everybody.
John.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for listening.
I'm Linda, and we have Jason.
Hi, everybody.
And we also have a huge audience of people at the ASME conference, so welcome to everybody.
Smart, good-looking people at the ASME conference.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
very handsome.
For some reason, Jason chose this paper. I guess we're going to hear why. So go ahead, Jason.
All right, I've entitled this episode, Getting Realist with New Medical Schools, the 8C's for Success. So this paper is by Dr. Kira Bukharan. It's Establishing New Medical Schools in Diverse Contexts, a Novel Conceptual Framework for Success in the journal Medical Education. And it just came out recently. So how many of you in the room have, by show of hands, have been involved in starting a new health professions education school? Like a new med school and so on?
Okay.
Just a handful of you.
God bless you.
Wow.
Yes.
Congrats.
That's amazing. I noticed that there's more gray hair amongst the people who have been involved than those who haven't. It's an important feature. So if you're looking for something to do, you could always start a new med school. Why would you do that? It's because there's not enough health professionals in the world. You know that. You're feeling it here. I'm feeling it in Canada. You're feeling it wherever you're listening on this podcast. And so I think the stat is there's 100 new medical schools per year. I don't have a stat for nursing schools and other health professions. 100 new medical schools per year in the world. And it's incredibly difficult to launch a new medical school. You can imagine what's involved. It's not just getting accredited, it's the buildings, it's getting the community engagement, it's getting the funding, it's getting students, it's getting an entire university or affiliated institution mobilized, getting government support, getting those initial teachers and so on, creating a culture for a new institution. So it's really hard. It takes more than a village to build a new medical school. And in fact, we looked at the research. Scientists have shown that if you want to shorten your telomeres and induce cellular aging, you'd be involved in starting a new medical school. It's a known thing, along with caffeine and whatever else new fad John's been doing. So the authors of this paper say that there's a gap in producing in literature about new medical schools, and so they've written a paper. I'm just going to pause there. For the three of you, my amigos, Linda, John, Lara, have you been involved in starting a new institution like a medical school?
A new institution that's not a medical school, yeah, our Center for Medical Education.
So any anecdotes about that experience?
It ain't easy, and particularly when it's something new like in health professions education, there's one thing you didn't mention, which I think was the most important, was publicity, was the PR that was needed going. People didn't know what it was, or everyone can do that. We don't need a special center. So we definitely needed to put our faces forward.
John, make anything new lately?
Well, I do some excellent arts and crafts. You'd love to see it. So no, I've never done a medical school. I've built a number of programs or national-based organizations, which were exciting because the emphasis was on the educational design. A friend of the show, Teresa Chan, who is at the Toronto Metropolitan University, is the founding dean of a new medical school in Canada, which is a big thing because there's only 17 now, 18, and soon to be 19 medical schools in Canada. I know we're small. We're just one of the colonies. I'm sorry, England. I know you have way more medical schools than us. But Teresa, who is an excellent education scientist in her own right, doesn't talk about the challenges of the curriculum design or the learning theory. She talks about dealing with government. And she talks about political fights with hospital organizations. She talks about finances. And she talks about all the stuff that is the infrastructure, kind of like the HVAC or the plumbing or the electrical of your house, and doesn't really get to talk about all the awesome interior design, which is, here's how we're going to make a diverse next generation of health professionals, or the really interesting stuff about we're using this learning technology in a different way. So it's sometimes a bit of a bait and switch about what you hope to do and what takes up all your time.
And the interesting thing about that is that's not what we're trained to do. Even if we're trained as educators and clinicians, we're not trained to talk to government, go get money, and do all of those other things that Teresa and all of these other people starting med schools have to do.
Lara?
So I'm going to go off script. I have built things, but I was in love with this paper from the introduction.
Oh, why?
2 reasons. One, they use institutional entrepreneurship theory. If you don't know institutional entrepreneurship, love that theory. I use it often. It's great. It's so fun. Yeah, theory can be fun.
Says nobody except for Lara, but okay.
But
There's a
awesome.
self-help group later. It's going to be in the hall. The lights will be off so no one can identify you.
You
It'll be
see
fun.
Lara's kitchen, she's got tea towels with theories on them.
But it's a great theory. There's so much good stuff in there. The other thing is that my hometown is one of the schools where one of the institutions was developed. And it's a small town in Northern Ontario. Well, small, depends on what you consider small, I guess. Geographically, it's huge. It's like hundreds of kilometers wide. But the importance of that institution in our community is hard to imagine. Like, my parents didn't have a doctor, and then the medical school came, and then they did. And I'm like, yes, 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 yes. So I love this paper no matter what.
Huh, wow. There you go. Okay, so let's talk about making new med schools. Let's talk about what these authors did. So Kira Bukaran et al. From 5 institutions in Australia, this team set out to examine the establishment of new medical schools in 3 distinct regions of the world, and their special their special focus was on areas that were underserved, geographically underserved. And the lens they used was Critical Realist multiple case study. Anybody in the audience use that? Critical Realist multiple case study. Besides Lara?
I'm a fan.
Nobody. There's one person that put their hand up by their ear, like they're not totally proud that they used it. We're going to talk about what that is in a second. And they operationalize this into a research question as follows. How are new medical schools successfully established in medically underserved areas? So here's their methods. I'm going to briefly introduce them. I'll ask Lara to comment a little bit about some of the lenses they used. And then we would love to hear from you afterwards whether or not you think that's a method that's attractive to you, or you would use, or you have used, or you wouldn't use for whatever reason. I just want to have a little aside. There was some belly aching when I chose this paper. I offered several medical education papers to my colleagues and said, I'm happy to review any of these. Medical Education is a great journal, plug for Kevin Eva. And then these guys, they chose this, and then they started reading it, and they started sending me emails like, there's a lot of big words in this one, Jason. I'm going to have to look up things, Jason. Way to go, Jason. I reminded them today again.
Did you email yourself? Because that sounds only like
that's
you.
not me.
It might have been, actually. It might have been me.
It's self-reflection.
Okay,
Yeah,
there
okay.
you go. So Critical Realist lens and institutional entrepreneurship theory are part of this design. So here's a moment from our sponsor, Critical Realism. Lara's going to use some more big words. CR, this is my take. This is frontline clinician educator take on critical realism.
This should be good.
Yeah.
This is going to
Hold
be
your horses.
interesting.
I copied this. Is a philosophy of science championed by Bhaskar, I think I pronounced that right, as an alternative to positivism and interpretivist paradigms. CR holds that there's an independent reality, so it's out there, but the human knowledge reality is fallible, so that influences the methods. CR research aims to provide empirically supported statements about how and why a phenomenon occurred in a given instance. CR can describe processes by which structures, actions, contextual conditions lead to an outcome. It's focused on explanation, not prediction. What say you?
Did you get that from ChatGPT?
I did actually. No, I got that from Wikipedia.
Okay, so let's have a small side note here about critical realism. So the first thing to know that's really important is that I would never want you to mix up critical realism with critical theory. Right? So critical theory is a paradigm that's really an umbrella paradigm wherein many different ways of thinking and theories are housed. And they are all theories that require the researcher to, so critical theory is all about understanding power dynamics, and a critical theory research is always about emancipation. So there's always this push in understanding, be it the role of social, political, cultural, economic, gendered factors and how they are at play in a field. And the idea is to try to create some kind of emancipatory moment. That's critical theory. That's not what we're doing here. This is critical realism. So critical realism is a very different paradigm. So you were right. Critical realism starts with this idea.
Can you just say that again?
No, I just realized I said it. Yeah, I shouldn't have said it. Yeah.
Music to your ears. You don't hear it very often, Jason.
That could be my ringtone. You are right.
You're right. So critical realism is a paradigm that bridges post-positivism and constructivism. So on the post-positivist side, if we think about how the scholar is going to think about reality. So in critical realism, they recognize that there is reality outside of us, and it's physically present. Like, so the walls of the hospital are real, my sunburn is real, and there are social realities that are also real. So the reality of medical schools, the structures we have, they're real. They can change in different places, but they're real. And so like the post-positivists, the critical realists say, believe in cause and effect. But what's important here is that critical realism thinks about cause and effect in a different way than the post-positivists do. The important part to know for critical realism is that they're interested in understanding mechanisms. They're interested in understanding how a mechanism explains how and why people respond in a social environment in specific ways. So understanding the mechanisms are really important. Now, they also borrow from constructivism, and constructivism here is important because what they're saying here is, what critical realism does is also say, while it's real, I have an understanding of it. I make a meaning from it. I interpret this reality. And so there are multiple interpretations. Jason's interpretation and mine are different. Not better or worse.
Well, one is.
Just different. So in order to understand mechanisms, we also have to understand social reality, the construction of it, and the mechanisms at work. So in critical realism, researchers seek to understand more than just describing reality. They're looking for explanations of how phenomena work and how those phenomena might be manipulated. One last thing, values are really important for critical realist research. They care a lot about the values that are at play in those mechanisms, in our understanding and our construction of social reality. So when this study asks, how are new medical schools successfully established? The study is looking to understand the contexts and the mechanisms at work in order to understand the outcomes that were generated. Clear as mud?
Awesome. Love it. Quick comment, Lara?
Yeah, just a question. So, Lara, when I was reading about all of this critical realism and stuff, what I took out of it was that it blends, and maybe it's my ignorance, personal interpretations of reality and what we could call objective reality. Is that, I don't know, have the right word, but real reality. I think
the thing that I would come out from is just to say that critical realism is not going to give you the capital T truth. Yeah, it's not going to do that. Instead, it's a statement based on our subjective interpretations of what works, for whom, under what circumstances.
Okay, thanks.
So I love when I find a paper that gives me a new tool to use for a future project or paper. And this one also introduces institutional entrepreneurship theory, which Lara mentioned a few minutes ago. So this comes from business, so it uses different language, but it is kind of cool that they imported it into the study. It's such an example of our field, which begs, borrows, and steals from all kinds of different other fields. Okay, so IE theory looks at activities of those who leverage resources to create new or transformed institutions. So people is a body of literature. It deals with, here's their terms, this is what they talk about: field conditions, institutional entrepreneurs, resources, rationales, and relationships. So these two ingredients inform the methodology of the study. Okay, so the critical realist multiple case study approach was applied to 3 new medical schools in underserviced areas. So those 3 schools, the first is the Northern Territory Medical Program in Australia, the Northern Ontario School of Medicine in Lara's hometown, and the University of Botswana Faculty of Medicine. The study had IRB ethics approval. So what they did is they acquired data from a variety of ways in the years 2016 to 2018. Notably, this is 5 to 11 years after the schools were established. The methods included site visits, document review, audiovisual reviews, interviews of key stakeholders. They did iterative analysis, and they used all the approaches under the sun. So they list them: inductive, deductive, abductive, retroductive, and retrodictive. I did go and look through all of those because it's not words that I use on a daily basis. All of these are in keeping with the critical realist paradigm. All right, Lara, John, Linda, what do you think of the methods based on everything we just discussed?
So I love these methods. I think they actually do a gorgeous job of the critical realist research. Their case study design is beautiful, and their use of theory is a beautiful illustration of why we use theory in research. I thought it was gorgeous.
I'm going to preface or anticipate that I'm going to give this a really high mark for the methods. They take an approach that says, okay, there's an objective reality, but none of us appreciate that, and so we find our own meaning. We construct that up, and that then gets translated to how we deliver and how we engage. They also say we're going to have a multiple case study methodology, and so if you read one case study, there's a quick answer: well, that's not me, that's that thing. There must be some contextual piece that makes it different, and so I can ignore this. But they sample from under-resourced areas that are global, and it's really nice to see the Global South included in this conversation. And then they have an axiology or a values, I think you used the values
right?
statement,
It was so good.
which aligns with me, which is what's the accountability? What's the social accountability of the mission of these medical schools? Are they making sure that your parents have a doctor?
I know,
or what does
right?
that look like? Or are they just building ivory tower research centers? And so they layer it on. I will foreshadow a little bit when we get later to voting that their language in describing all of this becomes a little bit tricky to get through, meaning they try to explain critical realism, they try to explain the multi-case study method, and they give us kind of like the introductory grad school seminar version.
Which is good.
But it chews up a word count.
Medical education doesn't have a word count.
Well, it chews up a working memory count in my brain then, because we want to explain succinctly the ideas, but we shouldn't have to teach everybody about everything in a paper.
Oh. Can we fight?
Sure, fight away.
I'm very interested in what our audience thinks, but I do think that one of the things that's really important about our field is that we make space for different kinds of voices and different ways of thinking about the phenomena that we study. And what that means then is that sometimes the scholarship and research that we do harnesses methods and methodologies that our readers don't know. And if they don't know it, it's very easy to dismiss a study because, it's just a case study. Oh, no, this is gorge. This is really excellent critical realist research. So I think it's important for us to create explanations for our learners, our readers, so that when they consume it, they're more knowledgeable about it and can understand the kinds of contribution.
I agree, 100%.
Yeah.
Except in this case,
No.
I didn't think their explanations were clear and it's succinct. And then as a reader, if you might go to look to say, can I learn more? The references are not great.
Yeah, but did you buy the book?
Linda,
You went and
take
bought
it
a
away.
book.
I'll agree with all this, but I must admit I found the method sections and the explanations really difficult and really hard work. I'm not saying we shouldn't have to work a bit, but I had to put one heck of a lot of work into trying to understand critical realism, and then there was institutional entrepreneurship too, which I had to go to. And I think I actually will ask anybody who's an editor here, can there be too much or too complicated? Or maybe this paper should have been accompanied by what I mean when I say something, which I think medical education does. That may have helped.
All right, I agree with all those comments. The more I read about critical realism as I prepped for this paper to present today, the more I thought, wow, these people are really smart in this area and this methodology, in this approach. The challenge about being really smart in an area is making your paper accessible. I did not find this paper very accessible, especially in the method section. Let me tell you about the results. Okay, so using this theoretical framework, the authors developed the 8C's framework that they can share with the world. So this is their generous contribution to the world. If you're starting a new institution or renewing one, they've made a framework for you to consider next time and to save you this, this is evidence-based that'll inform your work. It's to inform your success, right? So these are the interconnected ingredients for successful implementation of a new medical school. And then they made like 8C's, but there was a bit of like getting the thesaurus out or using ChatGPT, because some of these words are not everyday parlance, as follows. So the first one is you got to look at your context, of course, your local conditions. The second is you need catalysts. So these are your visionary leaders, your sponsors. They mobilize communities and governments. You need conducing. That's not an everyday word for me, maybe you. This is facilitation efforts. You need collecting. This is the resources brought to bear. You need connecting, which is building all the relationships needed, having the village build the medical school. You need convincing. Those are those compelling rationales. It's challenges, identifying those obstacles to achieving the vision, and consequences, intended or unintended outcomes. So the authors propose that their new 8CF framework, or the new 8CF, will be a useful guide to any who are considering creating a new medical school or transforming one. The 8 elements that they identified could inform decisions on implementation. Further, the authors assert that the model is widely applicable given the similarity of the ingredients that would be found in a variety of contexts. I actually thought this paper had a lot of things going for it. I'd love to hear what you guys think. I thought this was a cool paper to introduce or remind us about critical realist approaches and the multiple case series. And much of the HPE literature derives from a very positivist stance or post-positivist, though there's a lot of constructivist and interpretivist papers more recently. But this reminds us there's lots of other ways of thinking about problems. And this paper is another example of how you can identify a gap, find ingredients from other fields, and bring it to bear to close that gap. All right, Linda, John, Lara, what did you take from this paper? Is this paper that this is gonna help you in the future?
So, although I whinged about the methods section, I actually really like the results. I found them easy to understand and probably easy to apply. They're missing one thing, which I'll get to in a minute. The other thing I liked about this paper was the table they used for their basically cross-case similarities. I thought all of that was very easy to understand. The one thing I thought that was missing in the C was once you had those consequences, you have to go back. There should be an arrow back to context. You want it's kind of a program evaluation. I don't know. There probably is a C for that, but I think they need to have something to look back to see what difference it made in the context.
Maybe looping back to all of them.
Yep.
TLDR, this is a good paper. If you're in the construction of educational institutions or programs or that rare individual building a medical school, there's something here for you.
Yeah.
My concerns, I'll start with and then end on a positive note. I didn't love the alliteration of their final framework. In fact, I think it takes institutional entrepreneurship and just hangs new labels back on it. And it doesn't do it in a way that's easier to remember, nor does it provide increasing clarity. I think a lot of the findings there map almost one-to-one back to institutional entrepreneurship. So it's a bit of validation of that theory. It's certainly informed by that theory, so we shouldn't be surprised to see it. But 8C's, I don't know, maybe it's just personal choice. I don't love that kind of alliteration. This is just a pet peeve of mine. If you've listened to the podcast before, I always have something to say about a figure every time it comes across and it rubs me the wrong way. And they take this very complex analysis and they try to visually represent it with some clip art and some linear lines. And I don't think it does service to the complexity of what they actually offer to us. But the gem of this paper is their table.
Yeah.
Now, they don't label the social accountability out front, and they don't highlight it or redline it for you, but it's there. And so if you're thinking about what does it look like for an under-resourced, underserviced program that has a social accountability framework, they walk through all those issues that you might need as a leader, as a designer. And I think there's so much richness there that if you do nothing else, if you have Linda's antibodies to the methods section, jump to the table first because you know that dessert's coming.
I'm back on linear lines.
Yeah,
What's a non-linear line?
a curvy line.
Anyway, so I thought this paper was fantastic. This is a manuscript that is a beautiful illustration of how to use theory to inform research and how the use of theory can help with transferability across multiple different sites. The use of case study is absolutely perfect, and I'm truly looking forward to the next study, because I hope the next study asks about how institutions and how the communities keep graduates in their local environments. I'm from the north. I'm one of the places where the medical school is, and there's an interesting piece I found in the Northern Life. I don't know if you all read that still. Well, nobody else does either. But it's one of the newspapers from my hometown. It talks
Journals and newspapers are dead. That was Jason's punchline.
Yeah, that was his punchline. But it talked about how 50% of graduates stayed in the community. And I'm wondering what stayed means, because I know that 50% of the graduates are not staying in my hometown.
Well, it's a dynamic thing. Comes in and out.
But I want to know more about that, so I think it's awesome.
Are any of you concerned that they came so many years after the school launched? Are you worried about some issues of fidelity, that they came like 5 to 11 years later?
I think it's an asset, because it shows us, well, we would love to hear then from those who didn't survive, and maybe have that compare contrast. Is that what you're thinking?
No, I'm wondering if some of the founders are gone and they're missing data.
There may be, we see that in a diagram, which you don't like, John, but I think is quite useful. But maybe the diagram also has a timeline. There's, at year 1, at year 4, at year 6, and it might change a bit throughout that. 11 years, are they an established medical school? They probably tweaked as they went along.
I think any implementation scientist would critique all of us for saying, hey, we have a biopsy in time.
Yeah.
Everything is dynamic. And so you want to see something that's more longitudinal, reported as you suggest, Linda, but any biopsy will never be fully representative of something that's dynamic.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, it's your turn, everybody. We have like 5 minutes before the reception. So this is between you and wine. But I'd really, really love to hear from you. What are your comments about the methods? Does this paper sound like it's accessible to you? Because I'm really concerned that the average reader may have a lot of trouble and might even skip over this paper as a result.
Oh, we've got lots
What
of
do you think
comments
of
here.
the impact? Is this a paper that you think will influence the world? All right, let's bring the mics to bear. Please remind us who you are and where you're from.
I'm Sarah Edwards. I'm from Nottingham. Thank you very much for explaining a very complex set of theories and processes and things. My question really is, and what struck me about the methods was when the data was collected. Now it's 6 to 8 years ago, so 2016 to 2018. For this paper, does it matter? And I suppose more broadly, for listeners and us in the audience, when is data too old to publish?
Oh, that's a good question.
Oh, what a great question. Anybody got a comment on that? Stale dated data?
We, at our place, Meredith Young talks about zombies. And part of a zombie research is when the data gets too old. And you're right, in this one, the principles probably are the same, whether it's 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. But I think it has to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, frankly.
So there's so little literature out there, is their argument, that this is still an advance for our body of literature, I think would be their argument.
And their question is about, the process of new medical schools and understanding how they came into being. And their data sets were observations gathered during site visits, relevant documentation, and semi-structured interviews. I don't think it matters.
Yeah.
Right? I'm not sure that it makes a difference.
Right. Because you're asking them to look back
Good question.
anyway.
So if we found a papyrus from an Egyptian medical school, you
Then
could
yes,
just
we
work
should.
that in?
Yeah, that would be okay.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm John Cookson. I must declare an interest because I helped set up the Botswana Medical School,
Thank you.
and I was interviewed for the paper, and the 8C's are interesting. But if I was asked by somebody how to set up a school, I think I would say something. I would do it rather differently, and I'd point to all the stakeholders and the interest groups in the setup, and starting with the Vice Chancellor, going on to the university regulations, going on to the health service and the consultants and the GPs, going on to the regulator, and going on to the government. And you're right, we're not trained to do this. This is the curriculum is relatively straightforward. In fact, I took the curriculum from a medical school I've been dealing with in the UK. The curriculum worked fine. It was everything else that was the problem.
Thank you so much for your service.
So
Thank you.
basically we've just done a member check.
Yeah, exactly. Fantastic. Any other last comments? Methodology. This paper approachable for you, is accessible for you? Comments
One more.
over here. Love it. You're jumping in on both episodes. You got to tell your mother.
I don't know if I should say that.
Oh, you're totally allowed to, for sure.
Yeah, sorry, Jo Kerrins from Scotland. I recently used Critical Realism and really enjoyed it. And just reflecting on Kevin Eva's keynote, where we're thinking about striving to understand more than focus on the outcome or the product. I just feel like, for me, it's something I want to move forward with. And I wondered if the panel agree with that as a forward way for our... Yeah.
Yes. So
we'll do a big reveal at the vote.
No. Yes. I absolutely love it. So like I finished reading this paper and then I bought like a whole bunch of books about critical realism because I'm like, oh yeah, this is it. I love it. Yes, I agree.
I got Critical Realism for Dummies. That's the one I bought. It's short. Anybody else comments? Is this a paper you're going to recommend? Is this a paper you're going to use? And be honest, is this a paper where there's so much ologies that maybe this is too much work? Okay, I'm going to force you to vote. So let's talk about the methodology. We're going to do this a little bit different than our previous episode. We're going to go one at a time. So I'm going to call it a number. If you want to rate that number, put your hand up. Everybody has to vote once. I'll look around. So it's 1 to 5. 1 is I'm going to forget about this paper by the time the reception's over. A 5 is this has changed my life. I'm going to go home right now, maybe in my hotel. I'll be scribbling some ideas, and I'm going to use this paper that's going to inform me. You ready? So who thinks this is a 1?
For methods.
Methods, yep. 2.
Nobody.
A 3, nice, middle of the road, likable, lukewarm answer. Very nice. Who thinks this is a 4? This is important. Important methods, good, well done.
Here.
Who thinks this is a 5? It's changed your life, the methods.
Yes.
A few people. That's really interesting. We'd like to do a case study of you, actually. Okay, let's talk about impact.
Don't we get to vote?
Oh, you do get to vote. All right. Linda, John, Lara, methods?
Okay, I'm going to give this a 2.
What?
Not because the methods are bad, but because of the accessibility of this in the paper. It was too hard work. I agree with everything you've said. I think the methods are great for all that. But for the regular reader, I think they probably would, as Jason suggested, skip it and go on to the results.
All right, so as somebody who loves me some scales, I like that we're going to use the full range of the scale because I'm going to give this paper a 5. I think the sophistication of their study gets into sophisticated results. It's a mouthful if this is the first time you're looking at this, but the use of multiple cases, using a critical realist approach, and then underlying it with social accountability as their values statement, I think that's a very sophisticated approach that gives us a very nuanced understanding.
It's a 7.
Well, at least it's a whole number now, right? We're improving. Went from unicorns to integers.
Spicy, yeah.
I'm going to give it a 4 for the same reason as Linda about accessibility. This would have been a great paper. I don't remember that this issue of medical education had an accompanying editorial. But for me, as a frontline clinician educator who doesn't use words like axology on a daily basis, an accompanying editorial that unpacked part of this paper would have been useful to me. So I'm going to give it a 4 for methods. The authors did a great job. So for you, are you going to use this paper? Is this again changing your life? How many people? Not so much. It's a 1. A couple, yeah. And you're being honest. I'm drinking with you afterwards for your honesty. Yeah, they're honest people in the audience putting their hands up to say, yeah, I'm not going to use this. 2. Okay, a few more drinking buddies. 3, nice middle of the road, lukewarm, feeling Canadian today, very lukewarm. Good. Lots of people in the audience are 3s. 4, this is really important. You're going to use this. Wow, quite a few 4s. 5, changed your life. quite a few 5s.
There were
Good
a lot
on
of
the authors. What a
abstentions,
spread
I
in the
think.
room. There is definitely a normal curve in the room. Okay, same order, Linda, John, Lara.
All right.
Impact.
I'm going to give this a 5.
Wow.
And the reason is that despite my whinging about the methods, I think the results are great, and I can see using them not only for a med school, but for starting up a startup of something else. It's clear, it's easy to understand, it actually aligns with some of the other change management steps I use, like Cotter for curriculum. So I think this is a 5, and if someone's going to set up a medical school, I'm going to give them this paper. If they're going to set up a unit within an institution, I'm going to give them this paper.
John?
I think it's opposite day because I'm going to give them a 3. I do agree that developing any initiative from scratch involves complexity. And so as the authors articulated, the literature is pretty silent around med school development, but we could probably translate this to a number of other developments in terms of institutions or programs. But I don't find their framework, their 8C framework, bringing institutional entrepreneurship uniquely into the health professions education sphere. I think it validates it, it shows how it can be used, but I don't find the framework particularly useful. I do find the table have very specific and actionable results, and I think that's value. But 3, which means it's a good study, but it's not the paper that I'm going to run around with my hair on fire telling all my friends, you need to read this.
So I'm going to dedicate my answer to a listener who's at Exeter, and his name is Jason Hancock, because I know he's listening, and he and I are of the same mind. This paper is a 5, because regardless of how you feel about medical schools and developing new schools, if maybe you're not involved with that, this is a paper that shows you how to incorporate theory. And I know you don't like they changed the names, but I don't know, 5.
All right. I love this paper for teaching me about critical realism. And so if I'm working with a future colleague where this is the best match for a methodology or for a paradigm, I'm going to pull this paper, and maybe some others like it. So for that, I'm going to give it a 3. It gets a 4 from me because there is some value, I think, in for any of us who are working on an innovation that involves an institution. I'm setting up a new Center for Innovation in MedEd. And so it gets a point for me because this is an evidence base that I might pull. I also like the table. I find the 8C's not useful. So that's why it's not a 5 for me. So there you have it. There's our paper. We hope you enjoyed working through it with us. And we hope that stimulated some thinking. We hope that delaying your moving to the reception was okay, that it was actually value add. On behalf of all of us, we really enjoyed having you here at the Papers Podcast today. You can find us on the links in the slide, and we hope that in the future, you'll be part of our Papers community. We do give shout outs. If you send us an email, we will shout out to you. You can be driving in the car and tell your kids, yeah, they're talking about me on the podcast there, and they'll respect you a little bit more. Linda?
Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you later.
Thanks for listening.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the Papers Podcast. We hope we made you just slightly smarter. The podcast is a production of the Unit for Teaching and Learning at the Karolinska Institutet. The executive producer today was my friend Teresa Sörö. The technical producer today was Samuel Lundberg. You can learn more about the Papers Podcast and contact us at www.thepaperspodcast.com. Thank you for listening, everybody, and thank you for all you do. Take care.